So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to my research seminar. For any of you who do not know me, I'm Sara. Please call me by my first name. I don't like to be addressed formally, so please address me with my first name. I'm an assistant professor of political science at a Canadian university based in Cairo, which is called the University of Prince Edward Islands. And today I'm just happy to share with you some of my research that I have been doing. So welcome to Drawing the Unseen graphic reportage of silencing during the Arab Spring. But first, let me start by asking you, does anyone have any idea about Arab comics? Any clues? Any ideas? The first thing that comes to your mind when looking about this idea of comics, what is the first thing that comes to your mind?
The children.
The children, very good. So usually when you start thinking about comics, the first thing that comes to your mind is that you usually read comics for children. What else?
I recall a character called Flash, or like a magazine that had like some comics, Egyptian comics.
Okay, so actually Flash is a translated Egyptian one. So it's actually not Egyptian. What else?
Okay.
Yeah. So what else? Okay, let's try to think of the Western world. What is the first thing that comes to your mind when thinking about comics? So when you were growing up, for instance, and you used to read like comics during your childhood memories, what is the first thing that comes to you, or what is the first thing that you read? Yes.
Marvel, DC, Archie.
Okay, very good. Marvel, DC, Archie. What else? No French speaking? Yes.
Mickey Mouse. Comic books.
Okay, Mickey Mouse. What else?
In the Arab world, Maggot.
Okay, in the Arab world, Megan. Very good. What else?
I was going to say you have a comment online there as well.
Okay, so please welcome with me, Deena Mohammed is the director of the Arab Comics Initiative at the American University in Beirut. So welcome, Deena.
Hi, Deena.
So Tuk Samandal Lab Success is all like other comic magazines that came particularly during and after the Arab Spring. Thank you, Deena. What else?
I think I also think of caricatures in the newspapers.
Okay, very good. Caricatures in newspapers. Okay, what else?
Oh yeah, Tintin.
Okay.
This Samir cover reminds me of Tintin.
Okay, these are actually children comic magazines that come from the Arab world. The first one is titled Samir. Samir is actually an Egyptian one that used to be published, particularly during the time, maybe from the 1930s until the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. And then we had Sindbad before that. And then actually, the Sotarih, which is the flying carpet and Megan. This one is from Lebanon, and this one is from. Does anyone know where Megan's from?
The United Arab Emirates.
Very good. It's actually from the United Arab Emirates. However, the people who actually used to work in the magazine are usually Egyptian artists. And this is why this magazine was very famous for the artworks of Muhyiddin al-Labad. And these, just a very short snapshot of some of the comic children magazines that were actually coming from the Arab world, that is actually produced in Arabic language, and that is actually tailored for an Arabic audience. But am I speaking about that today? No. Actually, what I'm doing today is that I'm looking at, I'm actually looking at comics that are for adult readership that got produced and circulated and distributed during and post an Arab Spring. In other words, we are speaking about comics for adult readership that got produced after 2011, during or post 2011. And the way that I'm doing it, these are just bits and pieces of the research that I'm doing, is that I'm trying to look at how the Arab comic artists during and post an Arab Spring, they use the power of the visual verbal comic medium and the power the comic medium has in order to, the first thing, document revolutions, document atrocities, at the same time to uncover marginalized voices, and at the same time to show unfiltered ways of testimonies. And this is why I look at how the comic medium, and particularly how Arab comic artists, they use this medium as a tool that actually works as a form of history witnessing, whereby it's a medium that combines documentation, it actually combines resistance, and it combines activism. And this is why I look at this concept or this notion that is called comic journalism. What is comic journalism and what is actually meant by comic journalism? When looking at this idea of comic journalism, you are speaking about a field that combines journalism along with the comic genre in order to present news stories. And particularly when looking at this field, you need to understand that this field became very famous with the pioneering works of a very famous journalist, an American Maltese one, called Joe Sacco. And the works of Joe Sacco particularly, two pioneering works were two very famous works that he did. One which is called Palestine during the 1990s. And then there is another one that he actually did, which is Footnotes in Gaza. If anyone is interested for Palestine, it's available in the library, so feel free to have it. And actually, what is so interesting about this field of comic journalism is the fact that instead of actually recounting the news verbally, what they do is that they actually paint it. So they do work with actual stories. They do actually work with news stories. They actually work with all these storytelling and all these narratives and all these news, but it's done in a way where it is nonfiction. It is true. It is based on reality. It's based on the lives of actual people, of ordinary people. But then the question, so why is it very important? So why is it very important for this to look at this notion of comic journalism? Why do you think?
What I would say is that sometimes if the footage is too brutal, maybe people will look away because it's painful to look at. But maybe if it's presented through a medium that is essentially associated with art or lighter content, it would sort of break that barrier, that emotional barrier of not wanting to watch real atrocities. So while knowing that this is a true story, maybe the images aren't too hurtful. So it allows for more space to consume stories without shunning away from them.
Okay, very good. Do we have any more thoughts?
It fits people who are less literate.
Okay, people who are less literate. Okay. Less literate. Any more thoughts? Okay, the first thing is that when looking at this idea of comic journalism, actually the sources that you look are or at are ordinary people. They are ordinary people just living their normal day-to-day routine. And these people are usually excluded and omitted from whether the state histories or also whether from the accounts of state officials. And this is why when looking at this notion of comic journalism, they actually move beyond the state-biased representation. And in other words, what we call or identify as social scientists or political scientists, dominated histories, state histories. Instead, you are looking at all these people of traumatized histories, prosecuted histories. At the same time, when looking at this notion of comic journalists or comic journalism actually functions and operates as a form of a documentary, whether for trauma, whether for revolutions, whether for disasters, or even sometimes when looking at comic journalism, you use it as a source where you express extreme and deep feelings of stress and frustration and sorrow. And this is why, particularly within our world or the Arab world or the Middle Eastern worlds, particularly with all the events that are happening, this idea of comic journalism is actually influential and it's taking a lot of time and place.
All right, if I have questions, would you rather ask them on the spot or leave them to the end?
Which would you prefer?
Ask them on the spot.
I like
that's
my
okay.
sessions to be free. Let's vote. Okay, would you like to post questions in between or wait until the end? I don't know, end. Let's vote. It's a free seminar. Yeah, let's do a between us. Okay, who's for in between questions? Okay, majority vote, let's do it.
Okay, thank you. So I have two questions. Does comic journalism fly under the radar more than actual coverage does? So if this is a form of opposition to the formal narrative that is adopted by the state, so this as an opposition or a counter narrative, is it opposed by the state or does it just fly under the radar because it's cartoons? That is one question. And the other one is, I understand that this idea of telling stories that are untold and that may be closer to truth than the ones that are propagated through the formal news platforms. This might have been truer in the past, I would assume, but now with citizen journalism and social media and people having more democratic spaces to document their own experiences, does it still act as a space where underdog stories are being told, or is it now equal to other formats of documenting these stories?
Very good question. Okay, very good question. So let me break it down a little bit, which I'm going to show you some of the works that I used to work with. So some of these artworks are independent artworks, which basically means that the funding actually comes from the artists themselves. Sometimes they do not have external fundings or they are not state financed funding. So usually the stories that they tell is sometimes their own. It's the stories of the people. It's the stories that they want to tell. But other times it's actually state financed stories. So it really depends where is the funding coming from and who's funding you. But the majority of the works that I try to do is usually with the independent ones, not with the funding that you receive usually. However, what usually the artists do, especially in order to have exposure and present their artworks, is that they usually target, how can I say this? They target international events abroad in a way where they try to expose and exhibit and show their artworks. For instance, an international festival that support comic artworks coming from the Arab world, or events inside the Arab world. So for example, inside of Lebanon, there is the Mu'taz Sawaf initiative, where they support prizes for artists, whether independent work, not independent work. So it really depends. Others, for instance, they go to the international festivals, the international comic festivals in France. So it really depends the place you are going to and which areas. However, so that I paint the picture. So for instance, in Cairo, in Egypt, every year, there is the Cairo Comics Festival. And I think this year it might be, I don't know, Lina, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's the 14th edition. If it's not the 12th. So this is actually a platform where artists from all over the world, not only from the Arab world or the Middle Eastern world or the North African region, or from Europe or Eastern Europe, Western Europe, the US, everyone comes. And they show their work, and there are like seminars, talks, workshops, and so on. And the interesting thing actually about the Cairo Comics Festival is the fact that it is actually done in an Egyptian museum. So you actually go to the Egyptian Mukhtar Museum. So the Egyptian Mukhtar Museum is actually a museum inside of Cairo, where it's a museum. If you go inside the museum, it exhibits arts and paintings and stuff like that. But then they have a very nice courtyard where all the artists are around and just everyone's speaking with them.
Is this the same one that used to take place at the Townhouse Gallery
Yes, before
they shut it down?
Yes. Yes. And other than that, it used to take place at the American University in Tahrir campus. Yeah. Yes. Do we have other questions or should I go on?
Thank you.
Okay. And these are just some of. So these are just, I wanted to show you some of the artworks that came out during the 2011 Egyptian Revolution. And these are two very famous graphic novels that were done by an artist called Hamid Suleiman. And these two graphic novels, they are Egyptian ones. One was, both of them are done by the same artist, but the authors are different. So one is written by someone called Ahmed Khalid Tawfiq, and the other one is written by someone else called Hisham Obaya. And both of these two graphic novels, they basically narrate the events and the days of the Egyptian revolution during 2011 and all the events and incidents that took place. So this is one is called the locust effect, and this one is called the 18 days, basically impacting. So I just wanted to show you that these were one of the samples that I used to work with. And then, so what is it about this comic journalism? Why is it so important? And what is this project about? And how did the Egyptian artists actually did it or use it or how? So this is actually a project that was done at the University of York. And this project began in 2015 and ended in 2016. And it was under the supervision of an academic called Dr. Alisna. And this was done under the administration and supervision of the Center for Human Rights at the university. And this project was very interesting because this was a project that was done about human rights activists, or the term that they use in the university, which is called the human rights defenders, where basically they are looking at any individuals who fight and want to safeguard fundamental freedoms. And basically what they were trying to do inside this project is that they were trying to narrate the story of the activists in 5 different countries, including Egypt, Colombia, Mexico, and Kenya. Did I say Indonesia?
No.
And Indonesia. And Indonesia. And what they were trying to do is that they were trying to narrate the story and the personal lives of the activists and how they were actually trying to maneuver about personal security threats and how to maintain their safety. And this project, when they decided to do it, they decided to title the project, What Factors Make You Secure and What Factors Make You Insecure. And it's so interesting because all the project and all the narrations and the comics that you see inside the comic story itself is the fact that they speak about not only limited civil rights, they also speak about the infiltration of security threats, and they speak about the expanding levels of censorship, particularly over social media or over technology in general. But then when I spoke to the artist who did the part about Egypt, she was very interesting. So I met with the artist. What do you think the artist said? What were her perceptions? Like, I went and spoke with her and had a very nice conversation and coffee with her. And then I started asking her, so why would you be interested to do something like that? Wouldn't that be risky for the artist, especially she was an Egyptian artist? Wouldn't that be risky for the artist who was doing such a project, particularly in relation to activists working within the landscape, the political landscape of Egypt? What do you think her response was?
I think sometimes personnel from the authorities, when they go through social media, like to observe accounts and so on, I wouldn't think they would understand such kind of like comics. So it goes like unnoticed.
Okay, so it goes unnoticed, which is actually correct. Thank you. Thank you very much. So actually, one of the first responses that I got from the artist is the fact that this is not tailored, or this is not targeted to an Egyptian audience or an Arab audience. This is a part of an academic project. So no one is really interested to have a look on that. What else do you think she said? Okay, let me share a quote that she said. So this is basically how she responded. All the interviews were anonymous and assigned to me randomly. I had no say in the content or the terminology used. I only chose the title of the comic illustrations. The project mainly targeted academics and researchers working in the field of human rights. The purpose of the project was to bring attention to the work of human rights defenders across different regions. I was not concerned about my personal safety, particularly since this project is not targeted at an Egyptian audience and did not have a wide reach, exactly like Salma said. All the comic illustrations are only available online on my Behance account and the university website. I am not an activist. I use jarring and uncomfortable colors to convey the sensitive nature of the topic. I wanted to bring discomfort to the viewer. It's not direct symbolism where every color denotes a certain meaning. It's more of these colors make me feel queasy, which basically means make me feel uncomfortable. Okay? So actually, she was just a very young Egyptian artist who was just applying for an open call where she wanted to show her talents and skills in relation to some of the projects that were done in Western academia. So sometimes, not all the projects are done with the purpose of activism. They are not done with the purpose of resistance and not with a purpose. Sometimes it's just collaborative work between different institutions where they try to research and cooperate together in order, let's put it in academia, we say this, move away from the books, the articles, the long articles and journals, and just present the work in an interesting way. And actually, Deena, so this artist who is Deena Mohammed, she actually has very famous 3-part graphic novel. It is called Shubik Lubik in Arabic, which means in English, my wish is your desire. And she talks about daydreaming and desires of owning a car, a house. So it's a completely different narrative from the one that you see that she presents here. So this one was from Egypt. Does anyone have any idea what this is from?
It's written on the screen, so I'm assuming Lebanon.
Lebanon. Okay. Did anyone hear about the NIB before? No. Okay, so the NIB is an online comic magazine, or let's put it an online website, where they allow different artists and writers to actually work together and post stories from different parts of the world. So this is actually a Western-based online website where they provide platforms for artists and writers to publish stories about different parts of the world. So this comes from the NIB. And inside the NIB, there was an initiative to support artists and writers, particularly during and post an Arab Spring, to present stories about the revolutions, the events that was going there, and so on. And this one was very interesting because this one is called Lebanon is Burning. And this was an online comic story or narrative that was done by a Syrian-Canadian journalist called Yazan Al Saadi and a very nice, interesting Lebanese artist called Omar El Khouri. And inside this comic plotline or storyline, they recount the 18 days of the October Revolution or the October Uprising in Lebanon that took place in 2019. And basically, what provoked the creation of this comic is that they wanted to contest and challenge the implementation of the neoliberal austerity measures and policies that was being implemented by the Lebanese government during that time on ordinary Lebanese citizens. And in other words, someone would say that when they started, like when ordinary Lebanese or Lebanese in general spoke about this, they were speaking about imposing taxes on WhatsApp calls. Did you hear about that? No. So in 2019, there was this big fuss in Lebanon about the fact that the government wanted to implement taxes on having WhatsApp calls. And this what made all Lebanese furious. And this is when it provoked this October Revolution or this October Uprising in 2019, and the fact that they wanted to fight against the neoliberal restructuring or let's put it in easier way, the privatization of things. Okay, and this comic, actually, they decided to do this comic because they wanted not only to criticize the neoliberal policies that was being done by the government or the policies, but at the same time, they wanted to criticize the regime of visibility that is being characterized by the majority of politicians and the majority of successors, where it is one family from the other being inherited the rule of law. And this is why this comic actually offers a point of view from below, where it shows this perspective of the ordinary Lebanese citizen. So in other words, this was basically a cry to fix the existing Lebanese political system and its characterization by the successive warlords and politicians that has been ruling for a very long time. So what provoked it, yes, the WhatsApp polls. But the major thing that actually provoked this comic was the fact that when I was speaking to them, like the creators of the comics, they were very provoked and annoyed by what's happening in the Lebanese political system. Yeah. And then I had this very interesting conversation with the writer, the journalist, who actually wrote the script for the online comic. And I was like, but aren't you a bit concerned? Like, this is online, this is going viral, it's on all social network platforms, Facebook, Instagram, I don't know, you name it, Twitter, X, I don't know what other platforms they use today. And then I just asked him, like, aren't you a bit concerned a little bit about your safety? And then it was so interesting the way he responded. He just came out and said, like, doing comic journalism comes with risks. Reporting and documenting on political and military oppression is a risky job. And publishing online comes with the risk of becoming a sufferer of the tyranny being documented. But as I mentioned before, my Canadian passport has some benefits. So this is the response I got. The fact that he has dual nationality and he has a Canadian passport and he is protected by the Canadian passport. So he was like, if I stay silent and I don't speak, then nothing is going to happen. So I should have the power to speak as long as I have my Canadian passport. This is exactly what he said. Do we have any comments or questions, or should I go on?
Do you want to provoke us with some questions?
She knows that. So, any more comments or feedback or questions or insights?
The thing that keeps recurring is more on the journalism aspect than the comic aspect. It depends how much weight to allocate to each aspect of those two. And I think this is how much safety you would feel in that situation. Because if you're leaning more on the comic art and you're just being a tool for conveying the story rather than being more a journalist than a comic artist, I think it's the kind of attention that you're attracting to yourself. Because I used to work in journalism for a bit, and I know that the feeling of being very critical of every word you say and questioning whether it's worth the fuss. And once you go all in, I think you're very aware of what you're getting yourself into, and you're aware of the consequences and the possibilities of it. So even if you don't have that kind of safety net that you can fall back on as a dual citizen, I think you're kind of aware, and you're just like, if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. I think maybe like Deena, she sees herself more of an artist than a journalist, and for someone else, they would see themselves more journalists than artists. Like, I feel that maybe the graffiti scene was more politicized than the comic scene in that era. I don't think there was, at least for me as a spectator to that scene, I think it was very obvious that all the graffiti work that was popping up across Cairo was very political. Whereas, I don't know, maybe I wasn't exposed to as much comics as I was to graffiti, because graffiti was public and it was out there on the street. Whereas comics, you would have to seek them out or search for them in certain, sorry?
Live with them.
Yeah. So, yeah, maybe the political tone of graffiti was more obvious and was louder to hear than that of comics at the time. But
I
that's
would
another
actually-
conversation.
Yeah, but I would actually, yeah, agree with those books. Which brings us to a very important thing. How do the artists or the journalists or all these people creating the comments actually identify themselves? Am I an artist? Am I a journalist? Am I an activist? Am I a feminist? Am I an academic? Am I a researcher? Really, what I'm doing that for? And this is why what's so interesting about the air comic scene is that you see how different the people are and the different backgrounds that they're coming from and how they are identifying themselves. And this is why this project, which is also a graphic novel that was done by a Syrian artist called Hamid Suleiman, I think this was one of the most hardest conversations I have ever had with anyone. So basically, Hamid Suleiman, he is a Syrian who actually was forced to flee Syria because he didn't want to pledge allegiance to the Assad regime. And he was actually forced to exile from Syria. And actually, what people do not know is that actually Hamid Suleiman is highly educated. He's an engineer, he's a graduate of the engineering school. And he actually decided to write this graphic novel and to devote it to a very close friend of him that is called Hossein Al-Khayyat. And he decided to do this graphic novel because his friend Hossein Al-Khayyat was being tortured inside Syrian prisons. And this is when he decided to dedicate this graphic novel for his friend. This graphic novel, even though that is based on fiction, the plot and the storyline are based on real characters and events that Hamid Suleiman met during his journey when he was fleeing Syria. And this graphic novel actually speaks about the fact that they opened an illegal hospital inside of Syria that serves as a shelter or as a refugee for people coming from different groups inside of Syria. Which means that here you are speaking about groups of people, including the Alawites, which are considered a minority group of Shiite Islam. You are speaking about the Muslim Brotherhood. You are speaking about the Free Syrian Army. You are also speaking about journalists during that time. And this hospital, this illegal hospital, is actually being taken in charge by a pharmacologist and a peace activist called Yasmin. And throughout the graphic novel, it provides you with scenes and snapshots that shows you, for instance, the Russian air aids that used to be dropped. It also shows you how do you deal with ISIS, which is Daesh, which is considered a terrorist group. It also shows you how ordinary people every day are dealing with each other. And most importantly, they are showing you how are they dealing with bombs being dropped on them during the civil war and during what was happening. And for this artist, this graphic novel was very touchy, let's put it so touchy, or it's expressed a lot of feelings of frustration, sorrows, regrets, trauma, because it was showing a very alternative media representation from what was shown in the state media, particularly the Syrian media. It showed suffering, it showed humiliation, it showed also feelings of solidarity, feelings of cohesion, and most importantly, feelings of survival. And this is why when I spoke with Hamid Suleiman, he was very, very mad. I think he was in Germany when I spoke to him. I said, how hard was it to do this graphic novel? Or how hard was it for you to present all these things? Because he lived all these scenes that you can see inside the graphic novel and how he was painting it, and how he was drawing it. And if you check the graphic novel itself, it's drawn only in white and black colors. There is no colors at all inside the graphic novel. And this is basically what he said in Arabic. So in Arabic, he said, I felt that أنا طلعت من بدوري, which basically means in English, I was being uprooted. I was taken from my homeland. And this is when he said, Freedom Hospital was a project for saving my life. It was my chance for a new life. Out of a sudden, I was being uprooted, in which I was forced to leave my home, my life in Damascus. I was in prison. I was detained. I was a political prisoner. I faced direct gunshots. I was on fire. What other kinds of danger could I face more? And I have to say that his graphic novel actually won the PEN Award in England. Does anyone know what's the PEN Award? So the PEN Award is a very famous prize in the literature field, where they provide prizes for people who are very creative in relation to literary artworks or literature in general. Any questions so far? Everyone's getting so depressed now.
Yeah. I wonder if he had dual nationality or like.
No, actually, until this day. Okay, so I spoke with Hamid Suleiman maybe 4 years ago.
Okay.
4 years ago, when we spoke together, I think he was based in Germany. Sometimes he's in France or Germany. To be honest, he goes like both ways. So now he's considered a refugee in one of either, I don't know, Germany or France, to be honest. He told me that, but I don't remember. So he's considered a refugee, and he does a lot of things. He presents like the graphic novel in Germany, France, England, and the good thing about this graphic novel is that I know about the Arabic one. Okay, but actually the majority of the printouts are in English language, French language, German language, and I think Italian language.
So with this one, you say that it was based on true stories, but the actual story is fictionalized in a
Yes.
way.
Yes.
So where do you draw the line between comic art and comic journalism? Does journalism have to be 100% true, word for word? Or you can still include stories like this under the umbrella of comic journalism?
Good question. Yes, you're giving me questions.
Sorry. Because when you started, because this is actually a question that I've been thinking about when we started talking about this. One of the stories that came to my mind was Persepolis. And it was one of the stories, I watched it first as the movie and then I read the comic book. And
It's different.
it's very different. And to me, it was one of those perspectives about, was she from Afghanistan, right? The girl, either Iran or Afghanistan, I can't remember. Iran. And to me, it's an insider perspective of that kind of journey, going from that country to whichever Western country she went to, which I don't remember, but it was a very personal depiction of that journey. And I was thinking, well, even though I wouldn't get this perspective from the news, it still tells some degree of truth, even if it's not full unadulterated truth. So yeah.
Okay, I have to say that it's probably more expressive and serial to have the things fictionalized so that you can express it. So for example, I've been trying to find like the translation for this in English, but I have no clue. So there is a scene inside Freedom Hospital, okay, where he draws an image where it's just ordinary Syrian women just hanging the clothes, just like washing the clothes and putting them on the clothesline. Would it? Is it like that in English? Hamid
Yeah.
Suleiman, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. So, yeah.
Hanging the clothes on.
Yeah, hanging the clothes on the cloth line.
Yeah.
They were just ordinary Syrian women, just putting the clothes on and just in a moment, you're beautiful. Okay, so the way that he painted this, even though that this is like based on like a real incident that happened inside of Syria, but the way he did it in a fictionalized way was so much more expressive instead of drawing the bombs just dropping. So for me, there's this, of course, fine line, because at the end of the day, comic journalists or journalism in general, you're telling the true story. You cannot bend it, right? But in fictionalized stories or in comic stories or in narratives or storytelling, you can do it, yes. But how can you raise this feeling of empathy and sympathy and provoke your emotions? I think that's the fine line between the two.
Okay.
So reality versus fiction, or fiction versus reality. Well, I'm a daydreamer, so I would say fiction. So it really depends on your perception.
Yeah.
Okay. Any comments, questions, insights? Okay, we're going to get a little bit depressed more. So, this one, I have to say, I've been working for this on like maybe 6-7 years. So, okay, so this one actually comes from Lebanon. And this is a graphic novel that was done by a Lebanese comic journalist who likes to identify herself as a journalist. She does not do art for art. She deploys comics as documentary. So this one was done by someone called Rawand Issa. She's a very interesting lady. And this is a graphic novel that is called Aasiya, which is in English means the insubordinate, which basically means that in this graphic novel, she spoke about the military detention of Lebanese female protesters or campaigners who were accused of destroying public property and accused of fomenting unrest during the garbage crisis in 2015. Have you ever heard about the garbage crisis in Lebanon? So in 2015, there was a huge garbage crisis inside of Lebanon. And there were a lot of protests being done inside of Lebanon because the garbage were all over the streets. And this was done actually in response to a case that was very famous inside Lebanon that is called Le Gray case, court case. And what she wanted to do inside this graphic novel is that she wanted to narrate and document the military trials that were being done against the female protesters inside of Lebanon. And this is when she documents the traumatized or the trauma of these female protesters and campaigners. And she was very furious because what happened during that time, which she also shows in her graphic novel, is the fact that she also shows inside her graphic novel how she was furious about the fact that the Lebanese Ministry of Interior installed walls during the protests in order to forbid or in order to refrain protesters and campaigners from actually accessing the executive offices inside of Lebanon. And this is when she also shows how the security forces during that time, the military, let's put it this way, okay, were trying to handle these female protesters. They were taken to court. They were taken to military court. And according to the Lebanese Penal Code of 157, is that the Lebanese army, they have the right to try or defame anyone who crossed the line against the army. And this is why inside this graphic novel, she says it all, everything. From the moment the protests took place, to how the female protesters, campaigners were being treated, to how the courts were taking place, how were they dealing with them, and what was the outcome. And this is when basically this is what she said, which brings us back to your point. So basically she said, I do not like to introduce myself as an artist because I do not do art for art. I deploy comics as a tool. I publish comics with a purpose, with a particular message. I do not make art to be sold or to be hung on the wall. I use comics for this purpose with my background in journalism. I usually consider my comics a form of comics journalism and report on all my issues that have often been sidelined in traditional journalism. I'm not doing art for art. Yes, there is danger for anyone wanting to document what's happening. You're exposed to danger no matter what. This is by default began for me from the moment I started working within the journalism field, even before my comic publications. Yet, if I'm going to think about danger legally, I did not do anything that violated the law and did not abuse anyone. So she doesn't like to come out and say that she's an artist. She comes out and says, I'm a journalist. And actually one of her, so Rawand, this one was about the military courts, but actually she has another very interesting graphic novel that is called Batn al-Hut, which is Inside the Sea Giant, which is a completely different narrative and idea that she does in relation to the one about the military tribes. So it really, so sometimes they do things for entertainment, sometimes they do things that are politicized, sometimes they do things for awareness. So for example, Deena, for instance, she does a lot of things in relation to sexual harassment campaigns. So the way they identify themselves is really up to them. Which brings me to conclude. So graphic narratives or comics, they are actually a very, very safe space for witnesses and protesters to share their stories. And this is why graphic narratives or comics, particularly from the Arab world, they function and operate as an excellent space for documentaries. They actually narrate and present all these prosecuted, traumatized histories of sufferings, of sorrows, and of frustration. And this is why sometimes, not all of them, comic creators, they become what we call visual activists, in the sense that they are offering independent graphic artworks that combines documentation, resistance, and activism. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to questions.